A couple of weeks ago, during the homily, we looked at a little bit about how we are all called to share in the priesthood of Christ. How we are all called to be priests, to go before God on behalf of other people and to pray for them, and to be, in some way, a priest on behalf of others. And as I was reflecting on this gospel for this weekend in the first reading, I was taken back to something that has stuck in my mind and has stuck in the minds of lots of priests that I've talked with from Pope Francis. And this was actually something that he said about 4 or 5 months ago, but on his Holy Thursday homily, Pope Francis said that priests, anyone who is sharing in the priesthood of Christ, is performing the role of a shepherd. And of course, we hear that all the time in the gospel, that reference of Christ as a shepherd and the fact that we're supposed to imitate him as a shepherd. And the image that Pope Francis used, that again has stuck with most priests that I talk to, Pope Francis said that if you're going to be a shepherd, that you must be a person who lives with the smell of the sheep, who lives amidst the smell of the sheep. That's an extremely powerful image because, again, what Pope Francis is saying is a shepherd cannot rule from a distance. He cannot be a shepherd. He cannot guide the sheep from far away. You have to be amidst the sheep. And indeed, you have to live with the smell and all of the inconveniences that come along with being in the midst of the sheep. And I think that then applies not just to priests in the church, but also, of course, to all of us who participate in the priesthood of Christ. We are all called to be people who live with the smell of the sheep. And I wanted to share a brief story from my childhood about the smell of the sheep. When I was about 7 years old, my mom would pile me and my 3 younger brothers at the time into our van, and we would go grocery shopping once a week or so. And it was one of our least favorite activities in my entire existence because we couldn't watch. We had to step away from our cartoons and playing in the yard for about 45 minutes. And we would go kicking and screaming, of course, but we would pile in and we would go to the grocery store. And remember there being at the entryway a lot of times, or milling about the grocery store, what my brothers and I and a lot of other people referred to as the bum of the area. He was the guy who was there, who was, homeless or at least pretty poor, and he didn't have really good social skills. But the thing I think that we remember the most, that I remembered the most, was that he smelled bad. And that was just something that I remember being aware of. And what made that even worse in my mind, in my 7-year-old mind, was that at some point my mom offered to drive the man home. And he took my mom up on that offer. And so my brothers and I would sit in the back seat and we would pinch our noses and we would snicker and we would whisper under our breaths about how this guy smelled really bad, and as the air circled through the van and so forth, and we would all, tell ourselves that we were enduring some great inconvenience. One time, I remember very clearly, my mom had made beforehand, before going to the grocery store, some of her blueberry muffins that are, in my mind, world famous. And she put them in a tin and she brought them with us to the store. And we took the homeless man home again from the grocery store. And when we got out, I remember very clearly that my mom gave these blueberry muffins to the man as we were dropping him off at his, worn down, almost basically kind of the shack. And he had tears in his eyes when my mom gave those blueberry muffins to him. And he told my mom that it was his birthday. And I knew, even at my young age, that this guy had probably just received his first birthday present in a long time, probably for many, many years. And that stuck with me a lot. And then, sadly, I think, I don't remember exactly how much longer it was, but not too much longer down the road, my mom came in with tears in her eyes to me and my brothers and let us know that the man had been struck in a hit and run and had been killed. And so my mom, in that gesture of helping this man come home, drive home and get home, and then of course the gift of those muffins was probably, again, one of the few acts of charity I think that he had received in that later stage of his life. And I think as I look back on that incident, that whole portion of my life, that whole part of my life or episode of my life has probably, I think, taught me more about being a priest than anything else that I've ever done. Because my mom was willing to live with the smell of the sheep. She didn't care about the smell, the literal smell. Whereas my brothers and I would have paid her everything of our allowance to not take this guy home anymore, to just leave him alone. My mom stepped up and said, this is what is the right thing to do, and she did it. And I think that then again, my mom was putting into practice what Pope Francis would talk about 35 years later, or 30 years later, about the need for priests to live with the smell of the sheep. Since then, as an actual priest, an ordained priest, I've tried to put that lesson into play as often as possible. I've failed many, many, many thousands of times and have taken the low road and the easy road and pinched my nose again and avoided the smell of the sheep. But there have been a few times where I have put my mom's teaching by example into practice. I think about going and visiting the nursing homes here in Brazil or in Brownsburg where I was at before. And when you first walk into a nursing home, you're probably struck by the smell. There is a smell of urine and things even worse than that, oftentimes that sort of permeate even the walls of a nursing home. And yet, and I remember as a young seminarian first going to nursing homes and wanting to run away, to pinch my nose, to leave, and to never come back. But my mom's lesson and Pope Francis's words of encouragement have reminded me that if I'm going to be a shepherd, the smell of the sheep is part of it. And it's something that we have to live with. I remember a young man who recently came and asked for a bus ticket amidst a busy day, or what I had decided was a busy day for myself. And he smelled. And I noticed the smell right away, and you couldn't help but notice the smell. And the poor are always asking for bus tickets. They're always wanting to go here or go there, and oftentimes, unfortunately, it seems that, or at least some of the time, those are sold and for drugs or alcohol or other things like that. And so my initial instinct was to run away. Not literally, but to push this young man down the road or tell him, maybe so-and-so can help you or maybe the police can help you. But I asked, again, remembering the lesson of my mother and again hearing the words of Pope Francis, invited him down to the office and talked a little bit about his story and checked it out and asked him where he was going and called where he was, and found out that his story was legitimate. He had just been released from state care as a young man, as a 17-year-old child, and was now on his own and needed a way home, and his family could not get him home. And so, of course, allowed him to, ended up taking him and getting him some food and so forth, and taking him to Terre Haute and getting him a bus ticket. But again, had I not learned that lesson about what it means to be a shepherd from my mom and from Pope Francis, I'm not sure I would have ever reached out and done what Jesus said, which is to care for the poor. And the reason I mention these things is because in today's gospel we hear about a rich man who smelled really good. He probably had all of the perfumes and the colognes and the Bed Bath & Body Works and the soap and the shaving cream and all of the things that we have that make us smell good, literally. And the man who was laying at his door every day, who was licked by dogs and who had sores and smelled probably really bad, and the rich man probably had to pinch his nose as he stepped over this man going home every day. And Jesus says that in doing so, this man brought condemnation and judgment and hell upon him, upon himself, for avoiding the smell of the sheep, the literal smell. I think we hear that as a challenge, and we hopefully learn from this challenge in today's gospel, and we learn from Pope Francis that we are supposed to be people who are not afraid of the literal smell of the sheep. We're supposed to care for and go out and encounter people in the midst of whatever it is that they're enduring, no matter what situation we find themselves and ourselves in. Here at Annunciation, we have the St. Vincent de Paul Society, and I've started it and asked our parish to embrace this ministry for one reason. Because the St. Vincent de Paul Society forces us as a parish to go amidst the sheep and to live with the smell of the sheep. And it is an opportunity. We have a second collection today for our efforts, and we will do that every fifth Sunday, which happens about 4 times a year. And we'll do other events and fundraisers to help the St. Vincent de Paul Society. But I want to encourage you, if you don't, not just to donate your funds or material goods, but also to get involved either with St. Vincent de Paul or some other organization here in Brazil that forces you outside your comfort zone, that forces you literally to encounter the sheep and the smell of the sheep. Because Christ says, if you want to meet me, that's where I'm at. I'm with the poor. I'm in the poor, and I am the poor. And so whatever way it is that you get involved, certainly, again, helping materially with donations and so forth is great, and it's a good first step. But Christ pushes us and forces us and begs us to do more than that, to literally, even if we're the CEO of a giant company, if we are busy with a family, if we're busy as a priest, if we have lots of kids, if we have other things that keep us busy, Jesus says, I don't care. You personally need to encounter the poor. And that's what matters. And not first and foremost for their sake, but because it changes our hearts. And it makes us become more in the image of Christ. And I think finally then, as we reflect on the smell of the sheep, what we find is as we start to work with the poor, as we start to encounter the poor as people, and not just through long-distance operations and donations, when we literally reach down and help the poor in our community and in our midst, what we find is that while they may smell physically, oftentimes we end up confronting the smell of our own selves, the smell of our sins, of our arrogance, of our pride, of our wealth. And that is why Jesus says, go amidst the sheep. Because in fact, it is our own smell, our own things that weigh us down, that Christ is trying to get us to overcome. And so may we have the courage to do that, to confront the smell of the sheep and to not run away, to not hold our nose, but to get involved, to dig in, and to care for the poor. And when doing so, may we also then be confronted by our own stench, the stench of the sins that cling to us, so that we may wash ourselves of those as well and enter with the poor one day into Christ's heavenly kingdom.